The first sock, I assumed, was the laundry line's fault. Linen pegs come loose. Wind off the eastern crags is a thief with no manners. And I had lost things to it before. A kitchen rag, the corner of a bedsheet, my patience. So when one wool sock went missing from the line behind the laundress's quarters, I blamed the wind, swore at it the way you swear at weather, and thought no more about it. The second sock did not have the decency to disappear in a pair. It vanished alone, its mate left hanging there accusingly. And that was the detail that bothered me. Wind does not choose. Wind does not select the left sock and leave the right. I stood there in the grey morning with one cold sock in my hand and the prickling certainty that something in the world had developed an opinion about my belongings. I was 19 years old then, almost 20, old enough by pack law to be wed off to whoever the council decided could afford me, and young enough to still believe most problems could be solved by ignoring them harder. This problem did not believe in being ignored. By the time I found the dead flowers, I had lost 4 socks, a hair ribbon, and a perfectly good apron, and I had stopped blaming the wind entirely. The flowers were laid on the windowsill of the room I shared with 2 other maids, arranged with what I can only describe as catastrophic sincerity. Someone had gathered them, frostbitten asters, a sprig of something that had been heather before winter got to it, 3 stems of a bloom I did not recognise that had clearly been dead for some days. They were brown at the edges. One had lost all its petals on the journey and arrived as a bare green stalk, presented anyway, as if to say, I tried. I picked them up. They smelled like a grave. Behind me, old Marin, who had served in this fortress for 40 years and feared nothing, made a small sound in her throat. Those, she said, were left by something with 4 legs. I looked at the flowers. I looked at her. A dog? No, said Marin, and would not say anything else, and went very pale and left the room. You should understand what kind of place I was standing in. The Iron Territories are ruled from a fortress called Varghold, a black stone fist of a castle set into the mountains where the tree line gives up. The Alpha King who held it was the strongest wolf alive. And I do not say that the way a bard says it. I say it the way the kitchen says it, flatly, as a fact about the weather. King Torvald of the Iron Line had held his crown for 11 years and had never once been challenged twice by the same man. Rival packs sent him tribute. Enemy kings sent him their daughters. He was 32, unmated, immovable, and so far above the notice of a laundry-adjacent Omega maid that we existed in different worlds that happened to share a roof. I had seen him exactly 4 times in 2 years of service, each time from a great distance. Each time he had looked carved out of the same stone as his castle, still, severe, the kind of stillness that makes a room arrange itself around a man without his asking. He did not know I existed. I was very comfortable with him not knowing I existed. It is a peaceful thing, being unseen by power. You can watch it freely. I had watched him preside over the autumn judgments from the back of the Great Hall, and I had thought, with the private dryness that was the only luxury my station afforded me, there is a man who has never once in his life been told no. I was wrong about that, as it turned out. I was about to start telling him no quite a lot. But that came later. First came the boots. I caught the thief on the 9th day. I had stayed back from the line on purpose, tucked into the doorway of the drying shed with a broom I was pretending to use. Because I had decided that whatever superstition old Marin was nursing, I was a practical woman, and practical women catch their own sock thieves. The wolf came at dusk. He came the way weather comes over the crags, without announcement, suddenly simply there, enormous and silver dark, and moving through the laundry yard with the unhurried confidence of something that has never had to be afraid. He was the size of a small horse. His coat was the grey of wood smoke and old iron, and he walked directly to the line, considered it with the gravity of a scholar selecting a text, and took, delicately, between teeth that could have closed on my throat without effort, a single stocking. Then he saw me. I want to be honest about this moment because it became important later, and because everyone who has heard the story since has gotten it wrong. They imagine I screamed. They imagine I ran. I did neither. I stood in the doorway holding a broom, and the largest wolf I had ever seen stood 12 feet away, holding my stocking in his mouth, and we looked at each other. His ears went back, not in threat, in something that, on a creature with that much dignity, could only be called embarrassment. He lowered his head a fraction. The stocking hung from his jaw, absurd, grey wool against all that lethal silver. "That," I said, "is mine." The wolf did not move. "You have 4 already," I said, "and the asters, which were dead, by the way. If you are going to commit to a campaign of theft and graveside botany, the least you could do is steal me something I can wear in matching quantities." I do not know what I expected. I had just delivered a lecture on laundry to an apex predator. By every rule of sense I had ever been taught, I should have been backing away with my eyes down, because meeting a dominant wolf's gaze is a challenge, and challenging the largest wolf in the territory is the kind of mistake you only get to make once. But the wolf did not read it as a challenge. The wolf read it as a conversation. He set the stocking down, on the ground, between us, with enormous care, as if returning it. Then he looked at me, with eyes that were not an animal's eyes at all. They were grey, and they were old, and they were mortified, and he turned and went back over the wall the way he had come, leaving me alone in the dusk with my recovered laundry and the dawning, ridiculous understanding of exactly whose wolf I had just scolded. There is only one wolf that size in the Iron Territories. I sat down on an overturned wash tub and put my head in my hands and laughed until my ribs hurt. Because the alternative was to think clearly about what it meant, and I was not ready. The flowers kept coming. This is the part I still cannot quite explain, so I will simply report it. After the night in the laundry yard, after he knew that I knew, a more reasonable creature would have stopped. The secret was out. The dignified thing, the kingly thing, would have been to never, ever do it again. He could not stop. A bundle of half-frozen winterberries appeared on the sill 3 days later, the leaves already going to slime. A bird's feather, iridescent and genuinely lovely, which was an improvement, except it was followed the next morning by what I am almost certain was a vole, deposited on the threshold with great ceremony, which was emphatically not. I returned the vole to the garden. I kept the feather. I told no one, because who, precisely, was I going to tell? "The king's wolf is courting me with corpses" is not a sentence you say out loud in a fortress where the walls listen. And then, 11 days after the laundry yard, I was summoned to the King's Library to dust. I had never been inside it. Omega maids cleaned the lower halls and the kitchens and the guest wings. The King's private rooms were tended by trusted servants of higher rank. So when the steward read my name off his list, with a frown that suggested he had checked it twice, I understood 2 things at once. That someone had requested me specifically, and that the someone had not been the steward. The library was the warmest room I had ever stood in. It went up 3 floors, walled in books and lit by a hearth the size of a cart, and it smelled of beeswax and old parchment and wood smoke, and I forgot for a moment to be nervous. because I had never in my life seen so many beautiful things in one place that I was permitted to touch. He was at the far end, at a desk, pretending to read. I say pretending because I watched him turn a page without his eyes moving, and a man whose eyes do not move is not reading. He was aware of me the way a held breath is aware of the next breath. The great grey stillness I had watched from the back of the hall was still there, but underneath it, for the first time, I could see the effort it cost him. The stillness was not natural, it was held. He was holding it the way you hold a door against a wind. I curtsied. I began to dust. "You are the one from the laundry," he said. It was not a question, so I did not answer it. I dusted the spine of a book about the migration of mountain herds and waited. He set down his page. "I owe you an apology." "For the socks," I said, "or the vole?" His jaw moved once before he found the words. I would come to know that, the small mechanical hitch of a man translating from a language he was fluent in into one he was not. I was not aware of the vole. It was a thoughtful vole, as voles go. He is not... The king started again. I do not have full command of him in this. He is not usually like this. He has never been like this. He, not it. He spoke of his wolf the way you speak of a younger brother who keeps embarrassing the family at feasts. "And what is he like, usually?" I asked. The king looked at me for a long moment. The fire popped. 3 floors of books held their breath with me, obedient, he said, and the dryness in it surprised me. The first crack of something human in all that stone. He is the most disciplined wolf of 4 territories. Ballads have been written about his restraint. A pause. He stole a sock off the line yesterday, in front of the Gaythorne ambassador. I did not laugh. I was a near thing. I bit the inside of my cheek and dusted a shelf with great concentration, and said, in a voice I kept very level, "That must have been difficult to explain." I told them it was a hunting drill. "With a sock." "With a sock," the king of the Iron Territories agreed, and put his face briefly into his hand. And I understood that the most feared man alive was, in this one small arena, completely without defences, and that I had wandered directly into the centre of it, holding a dust rag. If you have made it this far, stay with me. What comes next is the part I have never told anyone. The part where I stopped finding it funny and started finding it frightening. Because frightening is what it becomes when you realise you might want it. If this story has its hooks in you, the way it still has them in me, follow along. There is a great deal more, and it gets stranger before it gets sweet. I was given a new assignment the following week. It was phrased as routine. The library required regular care, the steward said, not looking at me, in the tone of a man delivering instructions he disagreed with. I would attend it 3 mornings a week. I would, he did not say but clearly meant, stop appearing in places the king's wolf could rob. So 3 mornings a week, I dusted books in the warmest room in the fortress, while the most powerful wolf alive pretended to read at the far end, and lost, slowly, the war he was fighting against his own nature. I learned him in pieces. I learned that he took his tea bitter and never finished it, that he left the cup precisely 2 inches from the edge of the desk every time, a man who governed even his own clumsiness. I learned he could not bear an untidy shelf, and would, when he thought I was not looking, rise and straighten a row of spines I had left a finger's width out of truth, then return to his desk and his unread page as if nothing had happened. I learned that when I spoke, he stopped breathing for the length of a sentence, and I learned this was the dangerous one. that I had begun arranging the shelves wrong, on purpose, just to watch him get up. The flowers improved. He had clearly received instruction from somewhere, or his wolf had absorbed some hard lesson about botany, because the dead asters gave way to living things. A sprig of mountain laurel that lasted a week in a cup of water on my windowsill. A single white winter rose that should not have been blooming in that season, and that I never asked how he had found. I did not thank him for any of it. We never spoke of the flowers in the library. That was the arrangement neither of us had agreed to. In the library, he was a king, apologising for his wolf. And outside it, he was a wolf who could not stop, and the two were not permitted to acknowledge each other. It should have been absurd. It was. It was also the most alive I had felt in 2 years of being no one. Which is precisely when the Lady Sigrun noticed me. Lady Sigrun of the Westmark had come to Varghold in the autumn with her father's banners and her own clear understanding of why. She was the most advantageous match in 3 territories. High-born, sharp, beautiful in the way a blade is beautiful, and entirely aware that the king's continued refusal to marry was the only thing standing between her and a crown. She had spent a season being gracious about it. She had attended every judgment, sat at every feast, positioned herself in every corridor the king was known to walk. And the king had been unfailingly courteous and immovable. And Lady Sigrun had been patient, because patience is cheap when you believe the prize is inevitable. Then the king's wolf started stealing a maid's laundry, and the prize stopped being inevitable, and Lady Sigrun stopped being patient. She came to the library on a morning she knew I would be there. I do not know how she knew. I have since learned that in a fortress, the people at the bottom and the people at the top both know everything. It is only the comfortable middle that walks around blind. I was on the second tier when she entered, dusting, and the king was at his desk, and she swept in without announcement, in a gown the colour of dried blood, and said, "Your Grace, I did not realise you kept the library staffed during your private hours." The king rose, courtesy. "Lady Sigrun, I'll only be a moment." She drifted along the lower shelves, trailing one finger, not looking at me the entire time, the way you look at a stain you intend to remove. I came to return the volume on Westmark genealogy. I thought you might wish to consult it. A pause waited like a held knife. Given the conversations the council has been having about your line, I kept dusting. I had become very good at being furniture. The council may have its conversations, the king said. I will have my answer when I have it. Of course. Sigrun reached the foot of my ladder. She looked up at me then, finally, openly, and smiled. "You there, go! You've left dust on the 3rd shelf." I had not. The 3rd shelf was immaculate. I had done it twice. "My apologies, my lady," I said, and climbed down, because there are fights you do not win from the top of a ladder. "What is your name?" "Wren, my lady." Wren. She tasted it and found it beneath her. A little brown bird. How fitting. She turned to the king with the smile still on, sharpened now. "Your Grace really should consider the quality of his household. One never knows what climbs in from the kennels." And she left, in a swirl of blood-red skirts, having said kennels to a room that contained a king and a maid and the unspoken 3rd presence of a wolf, and having made it very clear that she knew exactly what she was looking at. The library was silent. I climbed back up the ladder. My hands, I noticed distantly, were not quite steady. I picked up my rag. Ren, the king said. I had not given him my name. He had it now anyway, taken out of Sigrun's cruelty and kept. Your Grace. There is no dust on the third shelf. He had risen. He stood at the foot of the ladder, 3 paces back, the distance he always kept, the careful space he never closed. He was looking up at me, and for once he was not holding the stillness. For once I could see all the way down into how angry he was, and the anger was not at me. No, I agreed. There is not. Then you will not apologise for it again. His jaw did its small mechanical work. Not to her, not to anyone in this house. You answer to me, and I have never once found you wanting. It was the closest thing to a declaration I had ever heard, and he did not seem to know he had made it. And that, more than the flowers, more than the wolf in the dusk, was the moment the laughter dried up in me, and something far more dangerous took its place. I came down the ladder. I stood in front of him, 1 pace inside the distance he kept, close enough to break his rule for him. You should go back to your reading, Your Grace, I said quietly. The Gaythorn ambassador will want to hear you finished a page today. His mouth did a thing it had clearly been trying not to do for weeks. It was not quite a smile. It was the foundation a smile is built on. Insolent, he said. Accurate, I said, and went back to my dusting, and felt his eyes on me the whole length of the room, and did not turn around. Because, if I had turned around, I would have done something neither of us was ready for. The thing about a fortress is that nothing stays in one room. By the turning of the month, the whole of Varkhold knew that the King's Wolf had chosen a maid, and the fortress divided itself into the people who found it romantic and the people who found it intolerable. And Lady Sigrun appointed herself general of the Second Army. She could not move against me openly. The king had as good as put his hand over me in front of witnesses, and even Sigrun did not challenge that directly. So she did what the cornered powerful always do. She moved in the dark. The first I knew of it was the bread. I was not meant to eat from the king's kitchen. Omega maids took their meals from the lower hall. But the library work had elevated me just enough that the head cook, a kind mountain of a man named Greg, had taken to leaving me a heel of the good bread and a wedge of cheese on the mornings I came up. A small kindness. I had grown to depend on it more than I admitted. On a grey morning near the dark of the year, I came up to find my bread waiting, and I was reaching for it when a kitchen cat, a lean orange creature who haunted the larders, got there first, tore off a corner and ate it. The cat was dead before I finished crossing the room. It happened fast and it happened ugly, and I will not describe it, except to say that I stood frozen with my hand still out toward the bread I had been 1 heartbeat from eating. And I understood, with a cold that went all the way to the floor, that the bread had not been meant for the cat. I did not scream. I have thought about that often. But in the 2 moments of my life that should have made me scream, the wolf in the dusk and the poison in the bread, I did not. I think some part of me had decided early that screaming was a thing you did for an audience, and I had spent my life without one. I picked up the dead cat. I wrapped it in my apron, and I carried it and the bread directly to the king. I did not go through the steward. I did not wait to be summoned. I walked into the great hall in the middle of a council session with a dead cat in my arms, and 40 of the most powerful wolves in the territory turning to stare. And I walked the length of that hall under the wolf throne, and I set the bundle down on the stone before the dais, and I said to the king, in a voice that came out far steadier than I felt, "Your wolf has good taste in laundry, Your Grace. Someone in this hall has worse intentions toward your bread." The hall erupted. The king came down off the dais. He did not roar, he did not shift. He simply moved. and the speed of it silenced the room more thoroughly than any shout, because everyone present understood at once that the stillness they had always known him for had been a choice, and the choice had just been withdrawn. He crouched by the bundle. He looked at the bread. He looked at the cat. He looked last and longest at me, at my hand, which I had not realised I was holding strangely until I saw him see it. A thin line of blood across my palm where I had gripped the cat's claws too hard carrying it. Something happened in him then that I felt rather than saw. The bond, I would learn to call it later. In that moment, I only knew that the air in the great hall went taut and warm and furious all at once, that a wordless heat rolled off him and through me like the heat off a forge, and that somewhere underneath the king's perfect control, the wolf had stopped being embarrassed and started being something with teeth. "Who prepared the morning bread?" the king said, quietly, to the whole room. No one answered. "Breg." The cook stepped forward, grey-faced. "Who had access to the upper kitchen this morning?" "Servants, Your Grace." And Breg's eyes went helplessly to the side of the hall. "And Lady Sigrun. She came to inquire about the menu for the solstice feast. She was alone in the larder a moment." 40 heads turned toward the blood-red gown. Lady Sigrun did not flinch. I will give her that. She was made of the same cold iron the rest of them only pretended to. "This is absurd," she said. "You would take the word of a kennel girl over—" "I have taken nothing yet," the king said. "I have asked a question. You are the one who answered it by defending yourself before you were accused." The silence after that was the loudest thing I have ever heard. They did not exile her that day. This is the part the romantic half of the fortress never wanted to hear. Power does not move that cleanly. Lady Sigrun was highborn. Her father held the Westmark passes, and a king who hanged a noblewoman on the word of a maid and a dead cat would have a war on his hands by spring. The king knew it. Sigrun knew it. The knowing sat between them in that hall, like a drawn blade no one could afford to swing. So she was confined to her quarters, pending the arrival of her father, and the matter was to be settled by law, and everyone in Varghold understood that law was a slower and less certain thing than justice, and that as long as Sigrun breathed in that fortress, I was not safe. The king found me that evening in the library. I had gone there without thinking, the way you go to the warmest room when the cold has gotten into you. I was sitting on the floor by the great hearth with my knees drawn up, and my palm had been cleaned and bound by then, by the king's own healer, on the king's own order, an attention so far above my station that the healer had bound it in furious silence. And I was looking into the fire and not crying, because I had decided long ago that crying was also a thing you did for an audience. He came in quietly. He did not sit on his chair at the desk. He crossed the room and lowered himself to the floor beside me, 3 feet of careful distance between us. A king sitting on the stones of his own library like a boy. And for a while, neither of us said anything at all. "I have failed you," he said finally. "My house was meant to be safe. It was not. That is mine to answer for. You did not put the poison in the bread. No, but I am the reason it was put there." His hands hung loose between his knees. He was looking at the fire, not at me, and I understood he had chosen that so I would not have to perform a face for him. "He chose you," he said. "In the autumn, the first day I saw you, at the back of the hall during the judgments, the mechanical hitch. He knew, and I did not let myself believe it, because you were a maid and I was a king, and I had spent 11 years being the kind of man who does not want things he cannot have. So I refused it. I told him no. Every day for 2 months, I told him no. And he stole my socks. And he stole your socks. The corner of his mouth did its foundational thing. He could not say it, so he said it the only way a wolf knows how. He brought you what he could find. It was... He stopped. It was dead flowers and a vole. And it was the most honest thing anyone in this fortress has done in 11 years. And it was mine. And I let him take the blame for it because I was a coward. The fire popped. 3 floors of books listened. I am telling you now, he said, with my own voice and not his, so that you know it was always me. You owe me nothing, Ren. You did not climb into my life. He climbed into yours. And I followed because I could not do otherwise. And you have every right to walk out of this room and ask never to be sent back. I will see you safe, regardless. That is not a condition. That is simply true. I looked at him for a long moment. The white rose, I said. In the wrong season. How? There is a garden on the south wall. My mother kept it. No one has walked it in 11 years. He said it the way you set down something heavy. I started walking it again in the autumn. I do not entirely know why. The rose was the only thing still alive in it. I gave it to him to give to you, because I could not bring it myself. I have been told since that I should have made him work harder, that a woman with any sense lets a king grovel a while longer than that. But I had watched this man straighten my deliberately crooked shelves in the month. I had watched him explain a sock to an ambassador. I had watched him sit down on his own cold floor rather than tower over a frightened maid. And I had just heard the most feared wolf alive call himself a coward to my face, because he could not stand to let his wolf take credit for his own heart. I reached across the 3 feet of distance he always kept, and I took his hand, the right one, the one nearest me, and I held it a heartbeat longer than courtesy required, and then several heartbeats past that. You walked your mother's garden, I said, to find one living thing in it, to give to a maid, through a wolf, so you would not have to admit you wanted to. Your Grace, you are the least cold man I have ever met. You have simply been very committed to the reward. His hand turned over under mine and held on. He did not kiss me then. I want that on the record, because the version that travels the fortress now has him sweeping me up in the firelight, and it was nothing like that. He held my hand on the cold floor of his mother's library, and he bowed his head until his brow nearly touched my knuckles, and he breathed once, unsteadily, like a man setting down a weight he had carried so long he had forgotten its name. And whatever broke open in me then was not desire, or not only desire. It was the simple, unbearable relief of being seen by someone who had every reason to look away and had refused to. The kiss came later, and when it came, it was brief and certain, and it undid something in my chest that had been knotted since the day I learned I was no one. I will not describe it further. Some things are not for the fortress. Lady Sigrun's father arrived 8 days later, with 200 men and a great deal of wounded honour. And for a while, it looked as though the romantic half of the fortress would get its war after all. I will not pretend I was at the centre of what followed. Kings and lords settle their disputes in rooms maids are not admitted to. But I was admitted to one room, because the king insisted, and because the matter could not be settled without me. They held a hearing in the great hall. Sigrun's father demanded his daughter's accuser face her in open court, expecting, I think, a trembling servant who would crumble under a nobleman's glare and reveal the whole thing as a maid's hysteria. He got me. I told it plainly. The bread, the cat, the larder, the timing. I did not embellish. and I did not apologize. And when Sigrun's father demanded to know why a king should believe a kennel girl over his blood, I looked at him and I said, "Because the cat is dead, my lord, and I am not. And the difference between those two facts is the whole of your daughter's intention." The hall was very quiet. It was Sigrun herself who broke it. She had held her cold iron all the way to that moment, but she had built her whole life on the certainty that she was inevitable. And watching a brown bird of a maid stand in open court and refuse to be small had finally cracked something in her. "You have no idea," she said, her voice gone thin and shaking, "what it is to be raised your entire life for a crown and then watch it handed to that." And she stopped. Because she had said handed to that, in front of her father, in front of the council, in front of the king, and in saying it, she had confessed that there had been a crown to take, and that she had believed it stolen, and that belief was the motive the law had been missing. Her father closed his eyes. It was over after that, though it took 3 more days of lawful procedure to become official. Lady Sigrun was stripped of her standing and returned to the Westmark in her father's custody. The engagement that had never quite existed formally dissolved. The Westmark passes secured by a marriage of 2 cousins that satisfied everyone's honour and broke no one's heart. Power moved the way power moves, slowly, expensively, and at last. I did not gloat. I had won, and the winning had cost a kind orange cat its life, and very nearly cost me mine. And there is no version of that I felt like celebrating. But I did keep the white rose. It had no business surviving as long as it did. It sat in its cup on my windowsill through the whole of that grey winter, and it did not die, and I chose not to ask why. We were mated in the spring, in his mother's garden, which by then was no longer dead. He had walked it every day through the winter. I had watched him from the library windows, a great dark figure moving through the snow along the south wall, clearing dead growth, and I had understood that he was not tending flowers. He was tending the thing in himself that had let the garden die in the first place. By the thaw, things were growing in it that no one had planted, the way things will when a place stops being a grave and starts being a garden again. He claimed me in front of the whole pack, which is its own ceremony I will not detail, except to say that the wolf who had once set my stocking down on the ground in mortified apology stood beside me in the centre of that crowd, with his head high, and dared a single one of them to call me a kennel girl. And not one of them did. And the Gaythorne ambassador, who was present, was heard to remark that it was the most disciplined he had ever seen the king's wolf behave. I told the king that later, in the library, on the floor by the hearth that had become our floor by some accretion neither of us had marked. "Disciplined," I said. "After everything. The ambassador thinks you have him under control again." I let him think it. The king, my mate, my Torvald, a name I had been given the right to use and still spent like rare coin, turned a page he was not reading. 11 years of habit do not die at a thaw. It seemed unkind to tell the man that I have less command of myself now than I have ever had in my life. "Do you regret it?" He set the book down. He looked at me the way he had looked at me up the ladder, the day he learned my name from cruelty, and kept it anyway. The stillness was entirely gone now. He had stopped holding the door against the wind. He had simply let the weather in. "I lost 4 socks, a hair ribbon, an apron, and 11 years of believing I wanted nothing," he said. "I consider it the best trade of my reign. There is a sock to this day that I have never found. I have looked. It is not in the garden, not in the kennels, not in any of the places a wolf might cache a treasure. I have decided to stop looking for it. Some things, I have learned, are kept by the people who love you, precisely because you would never give them permission. And the kindest thing you can do is let them think you do not know. So if you have come this far with me, and I am glad of you, whoever you are, wherever you are listening tonight, tell me one thing in the comments below before you go. Did you see it coming? The wolf, the flowers, the cold king who turned out to be the warmest thing in that whole black fortress. I did not. I thought I was a woman who had lost a sock to the wind. I was a woman the wind had been bringing something the whole time. Stay a while. There are more stories in these stones than I have told you yet, and I will tell them all if you will keep listening. Subscribe, and I will keep your seat by the fire. After all, someone has to know where the socks went.